This week, Zach Wasserman from Fleet is with us to discuss endpoint management. Finally, in the enterprise security news, Valeria, Vicarious, and Secret Double Octopus raise funding. Note, Secret Double Octopus is a real company name and a real company that chose that name. I'm making none of this up. Rumors about Zscaler's next 9-digit acquisition, 2 new security vendors, Chrome gets AI features, demystifying public security companies, security teams have too much data, a new threat intel database from Wiz, is bootstrapping a cybersecurity startup a realistic option? Remember Furbies? NSA's Furby docs just dropped. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
Identity is at the core of every great digital experience. Ping Identity's solutions support the scale, flexibility, and resiliency required by enterprise-level IT teams for lasting digital transformation. With 99.99% uptime and over 3 billion identities under management, they're the only identity vendor that's proven to champion the scale, performance, and security of large enterprises. That's why Ping Identity champions your unique identity needs. They give you the tools to offer your users the right access at the right times, no matter how they connect with you. Visit securityweekly.com/Ping Identity to learn more. 2024 will be the year of cryptography, driven by compliance requirements like PCI DSS 4.0 and the long-awaited NIST-standardized post-quantum algorithms. No longer can enterprises take their cryptography for granted. Cipher Insights from Quantum Exchange brings clarity to cyber risk blind spots that other point-and-scan solutions miss. The continuous network monitoring and response tool flags, scores, and prioritizes dozens of crypto risk factors in near real time, displayed through a single user-friendly dashboard for efficient management and remediation. Empower your NOC and SOC teams with actionable intelligence. Demonstrate proof of strong encryption required for zero trust. Gain the visibility and crypto inventory needed to begin your quantum-safe journey. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/quantum exchange.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Fish Taco Day. This is episode 347, recorded on Thursday, January 25th, 2024. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Admiral of AI, the Captain of Content, Katie Teitler-Santullo. How are you, Katie?
I am well, and I'm a lover of fish tacos, actually. So now I am hungry, and we have at least 2 hours of the show during which I can't eat.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I've been fasting, and I have had nothing to eat since about 9 o'clock last night. So I'm right there with you. I also love fish tacos. All right, and we do not have Sean today. He's taking care of some crises, so we're going to jump into the announcements and into our first interview. Security Weekly listeners, cyber threats are evolving. Is your organization keeping up? The 2023 Cybersecurity Year in Review is here. Uncover the latest challenges and strategic responses in CRA's 2023 Cybersecurity Year in Review, sponsored by RSA Conference. From the impact of generative AI to the risks of ransomware to navigating new SEC rulings, get ahead for 2024 with your free copy. Download the report at securityweekly.com/Year in Review 2023. Also, a quick announcement about a webinar I'm doing. Don't let third-party risk ruin your Valentine's Day. We are doing this webinar on Valentine's Day. You can join me on an SE Media webcast titled Understanding Third-Party Risk by Studying Third-Party Breaches. As listeners will know, I love exploring risks through understanding real and analyzing real breaches and incidents that have occurred. We'll discuss how to prepare for some of the most concerning third-party risks you should be aware of, along with our partner for this webcast, Process Unity. Join or visit securityweekly.com/Valentine Risk to register for the webcast. Yes, that was my idea to name it that. All right. Today's topic is the ever-present challenge of endpoint security and device management. We're excited to have Zach Wasserman with us, and we are excited. He is one of the co-founders and CTO of Fleet, but also one of the original designers and co-creators of OSQuery during his time at Facebook. Welcome, Zach.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. And the thing that's on my mind is, does octopus count for fish tacos?
Yeah, absolutely. I say yes.
I don't eat octopus, though, because they're anything that intelligent, I just don't feel comfortable eating. I have weird hangups about eating certain things. I was a vegetarian for the first 26 years of my life. I was raised a vegetarian, so I have weird hangups.
Well, thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, OSQuery, man, it made a huge splash and is effectively bootstrapped a bunch of companies. It's not often in security. You know, maybe the only other thing I can really think of is Snort. Not even ClamAV, you know, that's launched a bunch of companies like OSQuery did.
Yeah, and we're at about 10 years of OSQuery now. It was 2014 that we open sourced OSQuery first on Facebook. And as we're just into 2024, it's 10 years, a lot of iterations of OSQuery's governance structure, a lot of companies built on top of it, products, and a lot of organizations relying on OSQuery for their internal security. It's really cool to see.
It is, and it's it almost kind of reminds me of how SysInternals was a separate company for a long time, and eventually Microsoft just brought them in because they're like, you make all the best Windows utilities, you might as well be part of Microsoft. But notably about OSQuery is that it's not just based on one platform, right? Like I forget who did the initial work, but somebody really expanded out, did a lot of work on the macOS side of it, and then we got I think Linux was there from the beginning. Is that right? Were Windows and Linux there from the beginning?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it started out at Facebook in 2014, primarily focused on macOS and Linux. And the reason for that was because we had a huge macOS fleet of workstations that all our engineers and everyone in the company was using, as well as a massive, massive Linux production infrastructure. And those were totally underserved relative to Windows as far as security tools went. So Windows wasn't there in the first year. Windows came in, I think, maybe in the second or third year of OSQuery. But at this point, OSQuery, it has great coverage across all three of those platforms.
Yeah, so I got that backwards. It was Windows that came in later and Mac initially, which is not something you typically see with, you know, that I think that's a sign of the times in terms of what platforms engineers use by default, right?
Definitely a sign of the times. And, you know, thinking about SysInternals going to Microsoft, well, the OSQuery project went from Facebook to the Linux Foundation. So it's kind of moved further out into the community and continues to broadly support all three of those platforms.
Okay, yeah. And that is, you know, so talking about device management and endpoint tools in general, you know, that has been such a struggle over the years because there's, you know, maybe in the early days you could have an entirely Windows infrastructure, you know, but, you know, even 20 years ago, you know, I'm thinking back to my time in the enterprise at a large payment processor. And I don't think we had any Macs, but we did have a good mix of folks using both Linux and Windows workstations. And, you know, there weren't really tight policies there. It was kind of hard to police. So, you know, it seems like just you know, maybe if you're a small early stage startup, you could be 100% Mac and could get away with using Jamf or something like that. You know, but most organizations, once you get north of a couple hundred people, I feel like you end up with a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and an interesting byproduct of that is people end up either kind of picking best in class tools for each of their platforms. So they go with typically, traditionally like a Jamf for managing their Mac OS devices and their iOS devices, and then an Intune for Windows, or you kind of go for something cross-platform, but that's really much more second class. In particular, something like a VMware Workspace ONE, formerly AirWatch, where you can get all of the platforms covered, but it's kind of known to be really difficult to work with and not best in class. And additionally, right now, folks are looking at the challenges of what happens to a VMware post Broadcom acquisition. So that's something that we've really got on our mind at Fleet, where we have a really great foundation through OSQuery of telemetry and observability on these devices across platforms. And we're moving into the MDM space, where we just yesterday announced our Windows and Linux MDM support for the more active management. And earlier in 2023, we announced the macOS support.
So, mobile devices are a bit of a different beast. You mentioned AirWatch, and I was still on the enterprise side when Mobile Iron and AirWatch were first getting big. And I remember testing both of those tools, and we ran into issues where like they had pulled Motorola support entirely, and we didn't have a ton of Motorola's among our phones, but enough that, it was just really tough to pick a solution that covered everything. So how important, it sounds like we're mainly talking about laptops here, laptops, desktops. How important is it to include support for mobile devices as well? Or is that kind of like a different use case, a different area, in your opinion?
In terms of our product strategy at Fleet, we think it's critical. We think basically anything that's a computing device that you might have in a larger organization and an enterprise should be able to be covered through one platform, and it should have really good support on that platform. Now, we've again started with primarily Mac, Linux, and Windows because that's where we have really good support for workstations, as well as on servers, especially when it comes to Linux, where most folks have very large server deployments. So the needs in terms of device management are typically different on servers, but the needs in terms of monitoring and observability are very similar across both workstations and servers. There are certainly many requirements that differ around the performance considerations and that kind of thing, but fundamentally, it's the same kind of APIs that we need to get at. When you start to get into mobile, of course, we are talking about very different things. The APIs around observability are very different, and the MDM APIs are variable. In the case of Apple and iOS, it's the same MDM API, essentially. Now, the concepts are applied slightly differently, but it's the same API under the hood. On Android, it's sort of yet another API.
And when you say the same API, you mean the same as macOS?
Yeah, that's right. It's the same MDM protocol, the kind of equivalent commands and the equivalent ways of interacting with the devices, whether it's an iPad, an iPhone, or a Mac laptop or an iMac.
Gotcha. But yeah, I would assume on those platforms you can't run OSQuery just because of the architecture, the way mobile platforms are designed, right?
That's right. In theory, we could sure build an OSQuery that would run on iOS, but there wouldn't be much to query there. That's kind of the beauty of OSQuery, is it can compile almost anywhere in theory because it's just built on SQLite. SQLite is just C that has been probably built for more different devices than almost any other library, and so the theoretical foundation is there, but really the problem is that on both iOS and Android, there's not that much in the way of observability APIs that can be accessed. And I think that that's really an artifact of the very differing, more sandbox security models on those platforms. So as we move into that space, we'll be thinking more about the active management part and whatever telemetry we can gather through the MDM APIs, but probably not so much a querying kind of capability like we're used to having with OSQuery on the more full-fledged computing platforms.
Yeah. And, I want to jump back to Windows because I understand you just announced, was it yesterday or at some point this week, support for Windows MDM, correct?
Yeah, that's right. We literally just announced this yesterday. And again, what we're trying to do is make sure that there's a real viable future-proof platform for folks to manage all of the devices and not to have point solutions across all of your different kinds of devices. Point solutions for your MDM, so say Jamf and Intune separately, and also point solutions for the rest of what comes with managing computing devices. So things like vulnerability management, which we do in Fleet, and we already do cross-platform in Fleet. Things like getting all the rest of the telemetry that you might need for detection and response or for compliance. All of these things can be wrapped up into one platform. We can start consolidating point solutions and consolidating our platforms together so that we can better enable our end users who want to just be able to use the devices that they're most productive on. And we want to enable our IT and our security departments to get the control and the visibility that they need to make that acceptable and efficient for the organization.
So you've mentioned observability a lot, several times, and I want to talk a bit about product strategy here because you're alluding to the overlap between a lot of these different platforms and how we tend to have a lot of point products around both observability of devices. Thinking about the stuff you might send to your SIM, your SOC might be looking at. Vulnerability management stuff has popped up as a new use case that a lot of endpoint-based products can support. We've seen SentinelOne and CrowdStrike, basically anybody with like an EDR tool or an endpoint presence kind of jumping into this because they can see software packages and versions and things like that. And, then between MDM and EDR, asset management, software asset management, you have a lot of different buyers and users, right? So the people managing endpoints, the team doing that is probably within IT, I would guess, your service desk, your help desk team, whereas, except maybe in a smaller startup, whereas your security team, your, SecOps team, your IR team would be more interested in some of the observability data. So from a product strategy perspective, who are you building for, and like how much of that are you trying to capture and consolidate into one product?
Yeah, we're totally building for both. And some of that comes from the origins of OSQuery itself, where when we built OSQuery, we were a security team and we had goals around securing the organization. But we knew in order to do that, we had to build allies in IT to get onto all of the workstations. We had to build allies in operations, SRE, to get into the production infrastructure. And so from the beginning, the OSQuery project has been designed to have appeal across different parts of the organization. And I think that we've adopted some of that into Fleet and the strategy that we're using there. So yes, if we're selling MDM, it's almost certainly to an IT department. But that IT department in the modern day, they have security concerns. They're probably collaborating closely with security teams, and they can offer the security teams better tooling to work with and better ways to interact through the Fleet platform. And I think the other way around, a security team can buy Fleet, get all of the observability tools. They may not deploy the MDM tools, but the IT team still gets a lot of valuable monitoring information through the Fleet deployment. Things like, what kind of software installation and usage there is, being able to detect when batteries are starting to go bad on workstations, these sorts of things that are more IT kind of concerns. It becomes a tool that can be used across multiple parts of the organization. And I think that it's possible, and there is somewhat of a trend towards the merging of these things. I think you're right. Typically, it's smaller organizations, what we've seen, organizations of under 1,000 people, so less of the enterprise, where there's a sort of a CISO who's also the head of IT, or there's a CIO who's also responsible for security. And usually we see those things start to split out in larger enterprises. But we perceive that there's a shift as things like compliance start to have to go across all of the concerns from IT to security, and how IT and security both have really important roles and responsibilities in the complete life cycle of a device, from the initial acquisition to the user onboarding to the securing it while it's being used, incident response, and those kind of anything that comes up, and then the eventual decommissioning of the device, whether it's lost, stolen, employees terminated, or just it's time to get a new device for an employee because it's past the expected lifespan.
So yeah, it seems kind of challenging though, right? Like I talked to a lot of enterprises about how to handle asset management, for example. And one of the things I started telling companies years ago is, you know what, it's okay for different teams to have different tools because they have different requirements. You know, and you just spoke to it, like, you know, the detecting a battery that's going bad, or, you know, doing tech refresh, the kind of details you need for that. You know, you're probably not going to get out of a security product, and you're probably not going to get a whole lot of security features out of a product that does tell you, you know, the number of battery cycles and the health of the battery on a laptop. So I had personally kind of given up on anything that would kind of combine all those things. And I wonder how much of a challenge is it to build for those different users, those different use cases. You know, are you building multiple dashboards for each? You know, like when you have a product that covers everything from like an IR case, like during an active IR investigation, you know, the IR team, the CERT team poking into here and looking for details, to somebody doing a tech refresh, you know, trying to retire old devices. You know, how do you build that from a product perspective?
Yeah. So for us, a huge part of that is that we're very API and integration driven. And so we think that while Fleet should be the best place to get information about the devices and to manage the devices and make changes on the devices, you're going to be able to be more effective when you have a SIM, when you have a security data lake, when you have tools for alerting and security orchestration, that kind of thing. So we integrate really well with all of those things. Kind of everything is built in a very API first fashion. And then we're embracing kind of modern patterns adopted from DevOps philosophy, such as like GitOps, and being able to use configuration files to manage all of the data collection that's happening through the system. And we think that what this does is it enables people to get all of the data that they need and get it into the systems where they need it. So if you're an IT help desk, you probably use like a Zendesk or a ServiceNow or a Jira for tracking your tickets. If you are a security team, you know, maybe use Snowflake and Panther, or you use some other SIM and alerting system. And what Fleet is really good at is getting the data off the devices, whether that's the security relevant data or the IT relevant data, and getting it into the places where you need to work with it.
Yeah, and that's that's what I would suspect, right? Like the IR team wouldn't be logging into Fleet; they'd be logging into Splunk. They'd be running some Splunk queries or something like that during the investigation.
Yeah, and it's a mix. So the IR team is probably logging into Fleet during active incidents. For sure, they're logging into Fleet because they want to do things like run live queries. So they're probably looking through historical data that's been shipped from the endpoints through Fleet into Splunk. they're able to get, all the historical process executions or file integrity monitoring information, or, the registry entry changes. That kind of stuff historically is there, but as you want to start doing active reconnaissance during an incident, then you'd be logging into Fleet, or you'd be using the Fleet command line tools or APIs, or even, again, through your SOAR platform, perhaps, getting at the live data that's available on those devices. So it is a mix of those considerations.
Gotcha. And we neglected to mention earlier, I think you support Chrome OS as well. So that's another platform that you cover.
Yeah, so that's a fun one, and we essentially built a Chrome extension that embeds SQLite, again, sort of the magic secret sauce of OSQuery, the SQLite, and then provides virtual tables and can be queried in essentially the exact same way that OSQuery can be queried. So we use that to kind of render some dashboards and details about Chrome OS hosts, and also to enable live queries in the same way that you can do on Mac, Windows, and Linux. So that's kind of a fun new thing that we're doing.
So, I think one of the more interesting things about Fleet, and you mentioned it before, the open source OSQuery project going to the Linux Foundation. Just wanted to ask a little bit, like having built it at Facebook, it's still, we cover a lot of early stage startups, and me and Katie and Tyler and Sean and some of the other co-hosts on here have worked for early stage startups, and it's kind of interesting being at some of those and how they protect their information. Like in a lot of cases, as a someone in product marketing, like I have to fight hard to even be able to show screenshots, because they're afraid of competition and somebody reverse engineering whatever new feature we built from those screenshots. And it just seems so far from what I'm used to, where the whole base of what you've built is open source and available to other organizations. So what, just kind of curious your thoughts on, does that make your job easier, harder? Like how is that versus, I don't know if you've done a company without open source at the base, but it just seems so alien to me. Just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. So OSQuery was built, was born out of Facebook in 2014, which was a place that was still really built on and embracing this kind of hacker culture. And open source was something that Facebook was really supporting at that time. Projects like React came out of Facebook then, and we had management support to build something that was going to be open source from the beginning. And for me, that just really, it really drew a lot of passion for myself, knowing that the work that I would do would come to impact greater than just at Facebook, and would be potentially something that I could build a career on. And here, kind of amazingly, 10 years later, I've now been through multiple iterations of startups and consulting companies, and get the immense privilege to continue to work with this community, to continue building OSQuery, like, building this rising tide that's lifting all of these organizations that are using OSQuery, including the commercial organizations that are building products on top of it. And so for me, it's just an integral part of the culture. And it's an integral part of the culture at Fleet, where we are building an open core company. And so the majority of the code that we're writing, we're releasing under the MIT license. The rest of it's source available. You can go read the source code, and we just have a license that tells you you've got to pay us for a license to use those premium features. And so we really just believe in this idea of open source for community, open source for transparency, for reliability. And we think that open source is just a better future than kind of giant black box corporations that you can't get any insight into what's going on inside the box. You can't affect change. I think the big difference is, with OSQuery and with Fleet, like, you don't like how something works, you want it to work differently, just submit a pull request, and any member of the community can affect change. And to me, that's always been such a compelling and exciting thing, and also like important for de-risking businesses. Again, when we think about things like Broadcom's recent acquisition of VMware and what's going to happen to Workspace ONE users, like, you're kind of trapped, and you're less trapped, I think, if you're in an open source solution, because you can always take it and run in the direction that you need.
Yeah, I know a bunch of folks that are worried about Carbon Black now, after that acquisition. But yeah, it's a really good point, and it's certainly my experience. I've done a lot of product testing, both in my role on the enterprise side and publicly as a journalist. I've published a lot of product tests, and certainly I notice, with products that are based on open source, the maturity and the resilience of that software, it's almost a requirement, when compared to a product that like some vendors' products, it would take me 2 months of back and forth with them to even get a license to get my hands on it and use it, and then it would be terrible. It'd be buggy, a lot of stuff wouldn't work. I'd have to go back and forth with them and say, why isn't it detecting this basic attack? It's just a very different experience using something that's just wide open for anybody to look at and play with, because you don't have a choice there. It can't be, there's no fake it till you make it when it's on GitHub and you can just git clone it, right?
Yeah, and we love that. Like, that's fun, and we want people to come and take a look and challenge it, find where we've messed things up, find where there might be security vulnerabilities. Like, we all know it's software. There will be bugs, there will be vulnerabilities, and I deeply believe that the more open we are about these things, the more likely we are to find and fix the issues.
So, you mentioned you think mobile devices are very important. I assume those are on the roadmap. What's kind of, now that you have all three of the major platforms here, that would run on laptops and desktops, Linux, Windows, and Mac. What's kind of the next step? Where do you go from here?
Yeah, so we're at I'd say a 75% maturity level on our macOS. Like, it can definitely be used in production for MDM and is being used in production in large enterprises. Windows, we're kind of at the bare minimum maturity to go to production there. Let's call it, say, 50% maturity. And I'd say similar with Linux, we're at kind of a bare minimum maturity. So the plans over this year are to get those maturity levels up really high so that we are competitive with the kind of best in class solutions on each of those platforms, and to continue expanding to the mobile devices. So first, that will be iOS, particularly because, again, like I was saying, it's the same underlying APIs and protocols. And so most of the work is done there because of what we already support in Fleet, and because of some amazing also open source work that we adopted, which again actually is supported by someone at Facebook. Jesse Peterson at Facebook has done a bunch of work on something called Nano MDM, which is a sort of kernel for macOS MDM. That was a big part of our work. And so we'll be doing iOS first, probably during the first half of this year, Android later this year. And then we're going to also, continue to be investing in the security side of things. Particularly what we're seeing is a lot of folks are starting to replace their more legacy vulnerability management solutions with Fleet. Again, this is like consolidation of tools into a single platform. People really like that because it's increasing efficiency both in their budget spend, but also in the ways that their security engineers and analysts are spending their time. So we're continuing to invest in vulnerability management and moving more down the path of continuing to enable the kind of telemetry, detection, response, and compliance use cases that our security teams are looking at as well.
So it sounds like you could put what you guys are doing into three major use case buckets. You mentioned vulnerability management just now. We've been talking about device management quite a bit, and then the observability data. So endpoint, security observability, or whatever you want to call that. Are those? Is that how you guys kind of see it? And do you, or are there other major use cases that you cover right now or planning on covering in the future?
Yeah, that is almost exactly how we break it down right now. Is we call it MDM, vulnerability management, and then what we're calling endpoint operations, which can be an endpoint security for a security team, or it can be kind of more observability and life cycle observation, stuff like the battery and the software, the OS updates for a more IT focused team. So those are sort of our three main categories that we're going for. We're not looking to probably expand categories at the moment. We're not going to be an EDR in the next year. But we are going to make sure that we're really richly covering those categories that we have. And so some other interesting things that we're contemplating bringing into the product are things like binary authorization. We think that that's like a great security feature, but it also goes really well with a story around software management, patch management, these kind of things that are where IT and security start to blend together. But if we can introduce these kind of features, we think it will make a really meaningful difference in security for particularly workstations.
Yeah, it would be huge to also reduce the number of agents on some of these devices. I imagine a lot of companies probably have a dozen different ways to get the OS version, for example, from a device, with all the different software that they're using there.
And it's understandable. It's totally understandable why there are a dozen different ways to do that. I think because, like you said, let each team deploy the product that is going to be most useful for them. But I think that the really cool opportunity is let's make one product be the most useful one for multiple teams and then consolidate the agents.
Right. Yeah. And that's, it's, we've all been looking for that to happen at some point. So, I think people probably rally around you to get to that goal. It's a conversation I see CISOs bring up on a regular basis, at least twice a year, in some of the Slacks I'm in that are fairly CISO and Defender leadership heavy. It comes up like, what are you guys using? Because I just hate everything about MDM and everything I'm using. It just comes up over and over and over again. It's so cyclical.
Yeah, this is interesting because you're talking about CISO Slacks and people are saying, what MDM are you using? And then here we were talking about, well, MDM's historically an IT consideration. And so we're looking at, I think, this ecosystem where all of these things are starting to blend in more and more. And I think that we're going to need to really continue to find ways to enable both teams to get the tools they need. And particularly in places like MDM, where you can only use one MDM. You can drop 6 agents on your devices, but the way the MDM protocols work, there's only one on an enrolled device.
So and before we wrap up here, I kind of wanted to ask, as everything is becoming API driven here, I think classic MDMs, very much the buyer would be the service desk or something like that, but now that we have things like Tines and, security's more involved in some of this stuff, are you seeing any cool use cases, or maybe not use cases is the wrong word, but, workflows where things that are traditionally very manual, like maybe, preparing to deliver a device to somebody or preparing to bring it back or, isolating it. The cool use cases that you're seeing come out that just haven't happened in the past or haven't been possible in the past, but now are because all this data is pretty open and available.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So we for sure see people taking that data that's feeding out from Fleet and letting it go into their SIM and letting the SIM fire off alerts, and then their SOAR, their Tines can reach back into Fleet and say, okay, execute this script to do a remediation, or remote lock the device, or do a live query to collect more information about what's going on here. And I think it is an important part of the continued trend towards automating everything. And again, Fleet has been kind of built from the bottom up to expect that every bit of it is interacted with, not only through a UI, because it is all there in the UI, but it's all built to be interacted with through APIs. And that doesn't mean that our security engineers need to be software engineers, but it means that folks like Tines have built-in integrations for Fleet already. And so you can start to get that stuff there. And I think that we'll see that in more and more systems where you can just get the built-in integrations and data can flow in both directions and help us work much more effectively.
Awesome. Yeah, well, that's all I had here. I know we've got some great resources in the show notes for this. We've got your GitHub and a few talks that you've given, about the internals of Fleet and OSQuery, and people should go check those out if you want to know more about how this stuff works. And anything we've left out that's notable?
I think that the thing that I'll just underscore again is like this stuff is free and open source, almost all of what we've talked about. So you can go deploy it in your home lab today and have a play with it. And you can deploy it in production. It's production ready. So we'll be happy to have you as members of the community of OSQuery, which is, again, under the Linux Foundation, completely free and open source, and members of the Fleet community, which is open core, a ton of that, and it's certainly enterprise ready for free. And, we, of course, happy to bring on customers for the premium product as well.
Awesome. Zach, thanks so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today and answering all my annoying questions.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, stick around. We'll be right back in a few minutes with the weekly enterprise news.